Hello and welcome. My guest today is Professor Rangita De Silva De Alwis, a distinguished professor of law and global leadership at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, who was recently re-elected to the CEDAW with the highest number of votes, with 144 countries supporting. Professor, hello and welcome back to the studio. Congratulations on this incredible milestone, and it's so good to welcome you back.
Thank you, Sonali, for having me back. And I want to congratulate you on your leadership in this very important area of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And thank you for inviting me for this important conversation with you on this as we face an AI revolution and at the cusp of important developments in artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. Professor, just like you said, technology has really amplified violence against women in unprecedented ways. And we see the manner in which there are so many gaps in the offenses on the one hand, and the laws, the policies, and their implementation. Speak to us about this conundrum that we're facing.
Yes. So as you said, there is an accountability gap. And with the dizzying pace of technology, the rise of AI and new developments in technology, this accountability gap seems to be widening. So what I want to do today is, in conversation with you, raise several points. One is the ways in which deepfake and democracy seem to interact and create a chilling effect on women's political participation, as well as the ways in which it impacts and muffles women's voice, especially in terms of women in the media, women human rights defenders, and women whistleblowers. I also want to talk of the rise of new international normative frameworks that seem to be able to now provide us with the important tools to be able to address this growing momentum of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. I also want to talk to you about new developments in the arena of lawmaking at the domestic level, as well as important impact litigation, strategic litigation that also provides us with the arsenal of tools to be able to address and combat technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So I want to start first by also addressing the ways in which I have addressed this in my state party dialogues at the CEDAW committee. And I want to start with a time in history in 2023 when I was invited by the South Korean government to mark the 35th anniversary of the Constitutional Court of South Korea. And in my keynote address, I spoke of the ways in which in South Korea, the ninth room case exploded during a time of COVID, where young women were exploited and were lured into chat rooms, where they were called upon to strip and the subject to porn, and that has created, that really rang the alarm bells, not only in South Korea, but all over South Asia and other parts of Asia. So what I wanted to point out then at the Constitutional Court was that misogyny lies at the root of some of these platforms. As you may remember, Face Mash, which is obviously the origin story of Facebook, was created as a way of rating women in Ivy League law schools. And so misogyny and sexism is really part of the origin story. And I wanted us to also address the ways in which the law is trying hard to keep pace with new developments. And South Korea has really taken the lead in being able to provide accountability soon after the ninth room case. But when South Korea came before the CEDAW committee, I was able to address the ways in which offline rhetoric on anti-feminism seems to parallel online misogyny. And this political rhetoric that is growing around the world that is anti-feminist, and the ways in which anti-feminist rhetoric is pitted against what is called family values, is part of the larger political rhetoric around the world. And to a large extent, this is fed by the misogyny online and the ways in which it is up to states to be able to address this through due diligence obligations of the state. And how do we also address this through not only, what is called a three-tiered approach, where there is user accountability,
Right.
platform accountability, but also product liability. That how can we use this three-tier approach to be able to strengthen legal accountability? And when Thailand came before the CEDAW committee, I was again able to address the fact that Thailand is creating a new Silicon Valley in Southeast Asia. And it is important at that point in time to be able to address the underrepresentation of women in AI development. Because I also see, Sonali, the linkage between the underrepresentation of women in technology, especially in the AI field, and the growing misogyny in the development of artificial intelligence. So there is this symbiotic relationship, and to a large part, algorithmic bias, I argue, is a determinant of the underrepresentation of women in the in the life cycle of the production of artificial intelligence. So it is important that when governments are investing in either economic zones or in such as Silicon Valleys, it is important that we address this in a way that equalizes the playing field for women. And when the CEDAW committee, in a very historic constructive dialogue, went to Fiji to engage directly with Pacific Islands, Fiji especially, what we saw was that at that moment in time, the Minister of Women's Affairs had had to step down because of non-consensual intimate image abuse that she herself had suffered. And I was able to raise this in a way to address the deplatforming of women in politics due to the sexism and online abuse, either through deep fakes or through non-consensual sharing of intimate image abuse. And in doing that, I was also able to address the ways in which the new Cybercrime Convention that was adopted by the United Nations and was open for signature in October of 2025 in Hanoi, and now it is popularly termed the Hanoi Convention, provides some safeguards that looks at the gendered nature of online abuse, including sexual grooming of children and the ways in which cyber trafficking, cyber grooming, technology-facilitated gender-based violence, including deepfakes and non-consensual sharing of intimate images, are part of the panoply of cybercrimes that call for not only civil liabilities, but criminal liabilities. But I also want to address the fact that these are the gendered nature of cybercrimes, especially in terms of deepfakes and revenge porn. And MIT's research shows that of 98% of deepfakes deal with pornography, and 99% of that addresses violence against women. So it is important that we label this and we define this as a new category of gender-based violence, and that law reform must be able to capture this growing epidemic of cybercrimes against women. On the other hand, it is important that in AI governance that women be fully involved and fully represented. So when in our dialogue with New Zealand, I was able to bring to the surface the role that Indigenous women, Maori women, must play in data privacy. As you know, data is the new gold. Data is the new oil. And who controls the data, who owns the data is about power and control. So it is important that Maori women, indigenous women, are able to tell their stories through their data that is being collected. And the collection of the data must attribute this to the Maori women. And it is important that when we look at the data collection, we also look at the ways in which data annotation, data labeling can also create power imbalances as well as discrimination against minorities. So as you may know, that I look at this as the new human rights issue, the ways in which supply chains from the global south, especially from the African continent, is used to label and to annotate this data, as well as to clean the data from some of its most toxic elements, including the ways in which bestiality and other forms of abuse is deeply embedded in this data. And it is important for us to understand that that these new supply chains must be governed through a human rights-based approach. Similarly, the data extraction, as well as the extractive industry when it comes to cobalt. You know, we are talking of the AI revolution, and the AI revolution is bringing to the forefront the need for tin, tungsten, titanium, and cobalt. And in countries such as the DRC, the extractive industry, especially in terms of cobalt, have been alleged to be using child labor. So it is important that we look at these issues through a human rights-based approach. And then finally, I do want us to have greater engagement, and I know that this discussion really is something that you're very excited about, is the ways in which technology-facilitated gender-based violence and deepfakes have had a chilling effect on women's political participation. In our own country, we see here that women in politics have been abused through cybercrimes, the ways in which deepfakes and intimate image abuse has really stripped them of their power, muffled their voices, and to a large part, in many parts of the world, there has been a way in which this is a tool, the newest tool to deplatform women. And it's not only about women in politics, but women in the media. And probably the most famous case on this is the case of Maria Ressa. The Nobel Prize winning Filipina who started Rappler, this media house, and the ways in which cybercrimes and platform-enabled technology-facilitated gender-based violence has been targeting her because of the power of her voice. And then when it comes to human rights defenders, what we see is that whistleblowers are being targeted. So, for example, in the Kelly Stone Lake case, Sonali, where Kelly Stone Lake was a very senior employee of Meta, she was to a large part targeted because she dared to call for a pause in a product that was going to market. This was a video game. This was a virtual reality game, and she saw that there were certain elements in the game that was harmful to children, and there were racist, sexist elements in it, and she called for a pause, and that created a cascade of responses where she was put on leave and then finally asked to leave. And so this is a way of muffling and silencing women who are in positions to sound the alarm on products that are yet not ready to go to the market.
Wow. Professor, really powerful stuff. I'm just so overwhelmed by all of these issues that you just mentioned. Are we in a world of the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Sam Altmans, unable to really keep up with all of the offenses that are being created. How is the law supposed to keep up?
That's such an important question, Sonali, and it's just like you to go to the very heart of this debate. So, as you know, Elon Musk famously stated last year that we need more masculine energy, and I have responded that we need more feminist energy. And what we see is that to a large part, there has been rather slow, and the law is lagging behind the dizzying rise of AI products, but there have been new laws that address this, what I call the accountability gap. So the Takedown Act in the US was passed last summer, and it does call for immediate takedown of non-consensual sharing of intimate images, deep fakes. But at the same time, there have been challenges that this does violate free speech and freedom of expression. And I think those are valid concerns. But, I often say AI is can be akin to the myth of Prometheus. And as you may remember, in the Greek myth, Prometheus stole fire from the Greek gods. And as you know, fire is a way of sustaining human civilization. But at the same time, it has the potential to destroy human civilization. So it is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And it has the potential for great good and the potential for peril. So there is both the promise and the peril of AI, and how we harness the good and provide guardrails against the bad is really our next responsibility, and the responsibility of the CEDAW committee and all other treaty bodies. So I think I may have mentioned this on our way here to the studio, that the ICCPR, the Human Rights Committee, and the ICCPR, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, is our sister treaty body, is in the process of writing a new general comment on the freedom of expression and the freedom of assembly. The freedom of assembly and the freedom of association. And in my comment, my feedback to our sister committee, the Human Rights Committee, I mentioned the fact that the rise of the Internet of Things, IoT, the Internet of Things, by 2030, it is predicted that there will be over 125 million forms of Internet of Things. Right now it's our smartwatches, all of these smart technologies, smartwatches, the Alexa, the ways in which everything we touch is, whether it's our jewelry, that everything is connected to the internet. It is the Internet of Things, and this was a name that was given to this by my friend Sanjay Sama, who's a very distinguished professor at MIT. And, and all of this has important elements to it. It helps to connect us. It helps sometimes to protect us as women. But at the same time, these are some of the most powerful surveillance tools, which has a chilling effect on women's freedom of association and freedom of assembly. So we have to be able to, when we are strengthening the rights of women's freedom of assembly and freedom of association, to be able to look at what are the impediments to women's freedom of association and freedom of assembly, including these new technologies, including the ways in which agentic AI, Internet of Things, are creating a society where surveillance has been normalized. And so that needs to be scrutinized very carefully by the human rights treaty bodies. At the same time, we see that there is the rise of strategic litigation, where there are class actions being brought in the United States that addresses platform accountability and platform liability. So, for example, the most famous case, which is called a bellwether case, because it is the first of its kind. And it is, as a bellwether case, it feels the pulse in order to bring a cascade of other cases, and which is the case on social media, adolescent addiction litigation. And recently, 3 months ago, the court ruled that Meta would be liable for damages because of the harm done to adolescent knowingly, deliberately, intentionally, for creating tools that are known to be addictive, including the infinite scroll on Facebook and YouTube and on Instagram, that is known to be addictive and creates addiction among adolescents. It's called the new the new cigarette cases, right? This is called the new cases, like in the 1960s and 1970s, where cigarette companies were held liable for knowingly creating a product that would be addictive and therefore harmful. So this again is the ways in which the tobacco, like the way the tobacco company was being held accountable, this is a way of holding technology companies accountable.
Professor, we need to also speak about the phenomenal rise and growth and the ubiquity of the incel culture with the Andrew Tates and the Tristan Tates of the world. And this is across geographies, across divides, across languages. And from the real world, it has sort of gone on to be a key sort of determinant of AI as we know it. And you spoke about the gender dimensions and the online misogyny. As in Sri Lanka, how can we control this, curb this? Speak to us from your experience globally and at the CEDAW. How do you think we can take cogent, concrete measures to put a stop to this?
Excellent comment and question, Sonali. When Thailand came before the CEDAW committee in the summer of 2025, I think for the first time I raised the issue of the manosphere. And I think exactly what you're saying can be summed up within that construct of the manosphere. And how does this manosphere grow and thrive in online? And it is very much found its home online. And the manosphere is the one that is, to a large part, incubating the kind of cultural shifts that we are seeing, and the ways in which feminist values have been framed in a way that is not only damaging to women, but damaging to the political economy of our nations. So in a large part, across the world, we see almost a reversal of women's prior gains. The rollback of women's empowerment because of this call for women to step back and for women to embrace what is called family values. When the CEDAW, women's rights and women's empowerment is about the rights in the family and the rights of the family.
Right.
So rather than creating these artificial binaries and artificial dichotomies, we have to understand that women's rights are about the empowerment of the family and women's rights in the family and the rights of girls and rights of children in the family, that there is no division or polarization. Rather, there is this politicization of families and politicization of what are called so-called family values and being pitted against feminist values. So to a large part, I think I'm trying to frame everything that you said within that new political shifts that is that is harmful, and where we see that there is this kind of return home for women, that women are being asked to retreat back to their homes, and thereby reversing the ways in which the women's movement fought for the empowerment of women, equal rights for women in the public sphere, in the workplace. So having said that, you ask, what can be done?
Yeah.
And we see whether it is in Australia or in the UK, there are efforts to limit social media to young people and adolescents, whether under 16 or a differential age. And I think that is also one way of creating guardrails so that their engagement with the manosphere is also limited. And to a large part, what we see is it has both worked and not worked. As you know, there are cases that are now being brought to court in Australia based on the Constitution. So there are constitutional cases on this. But I do think that, and I know that Sri Lanka too is addressing this, is looking at whether there could be ways to limit young people's social media access to the social media. But more than that, what I feel is that we have to hold platforms and the manufacturers liable to the harm done. And whether it is, and the problem here, the complexity here is the extraterritorial nature of these products.
Right.
And so therefore it calls for a differential understanding of accountability. And I think there is an opening now, because given the fact that to a large part the human rights project was also very much situated within the paradigm of state accountability. But that is now shifting to non-state actor accountability, including business and human rights.
Sure.
And the framework of business and human rights, the guiding principles on business and human rights, the Ruggie principles, which are called the Ruggie principles because John Ruggie is the one who framed these principles, provide us with the kind of locus for this analysis. And Sonali, what we find is that the recent case of the Farage case, where the French cement company was found liable for crimes against humanity in Iraq and in Syria for its engagement with the ISIS and in paying the ISIS hush money, has created an entry point for us to hold businesses accountable.
Right.
For human rights violations. And I think therein lies a new approach to due diligence obligations of non-state parties.
So holding errant businesses by the collar is something that we need to implement more and call for more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to ensure that to a large part, then when these businesses function, that there has to be a multidisciplinary group of experts who are
Right.
part of developing these products, so that the technologists must to a large part be informed by philosophers, sociologists, feminists, human rights advocates, who then test these products before they are put out to the market. So as I said, Kelly Stone Lake was really a technologist, but even she came to this as a feminist, as someone who was being a watchdog, was playing the role of a whistleblower. So we need more whistleblowers. We need more watchdogs, and this has to be normalized in the technology field.
Absolutely. Professor, also speak to us about some of the new developments in terms of case law that are coming your way.
Right. So my analysis is that I'm testing this hypothesis is the fact that the underrepresentation of women in Silicon Valley in technology, in terms of as developers, as technologists, as CEOs, is to a large part one of the root causes of algorithmic bias. So everything that I have spoken to you right now have been the ways in which these products have direct consequences on women, especially women in the public sphere. I'm also looking at the indirect results of algorithmic bias on women in deliberative democracy. So when I say indirect, is the ways in which these algorithms are to a large part biased because of the data biases, and for the large part the developer biases. So there are these three biases. The data is biased because these products are trained on historically discriminatory data. That is to a large part flawed because of the underrepresentation of women in positions of power. So this data represents the underrepresentation of women, and then that is reproduced and perpetuated through the algorithms and through automated bias. Then it becomes digitized bias, and it's normalized and, as you said, magnified. So that then has an effect of indirectly excluding women from the public sphere, because it doesn't see women represented as heads of state or as brain surgeons or as neurosurgeons. It sees women represented in caregiving positions. And there is the nobility of caregiving, but both men and women need to be represented in those caregiving roles. So therefore, we need to be able to address not only the production of these processes, but also the ways in which a data collection needs to be very much an inclusive project. So the data needs to be inclusive in terms of gender, but also in terms of the global North and the South divide. And I have been arguing that the ways in which the digital divide is now replaced by the AI divide. Countries in the global South are less able to have access to the computational power of AI, or to be able to host a lot of these companies, or be able to be directly engaged in the production of AIs, and the ways in which AI also has had very damaging impact on our ecosystem, whether it is on the environment or the ways in which the supply of water has been now come under threat because of these large data centers. So I think all of these need to be taken into consideration by our governments, by non-state actors like the businesses, in the further progress in the AI revolution.
Okay. Professor, my final question to you, what do you think does an inclusive, dignity-centered, AI-driven world with sufficient guardrails look like?
I love the ways in which you bring dignity to this, the concept of dignity into this articulation, into this framing. And this is important because of the ways in which the Universal Declaration of Human Rights enshrines the fact that all humans are born free and equal in rights and dignity. So that dignity concept is at the center, is a core part of what we call the inclusive approach, inclusive, transparent approach to artificial intelligence. And as you know, Anthropic AI was one of the first to train to use constitutional AI, to create a constitution for AI. And it drew from the normative elements of the UDHR. And at that point, I asked that it also includes the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Because when we talk of all beings are born free and equal in rights and dignity. All beings include women. Most often, that is not an element that is brought into this conversation. But as you know, things have changed with anthropic AI, and so we have to go back to the drawing boards. But the way in which you frame this as how do we bring that dignity element? So the South African Constitution enshrines dignity. And more, what we see is that dignity is a major part of the assertion of rights. And how do we then ensure that human rights guarantees include dignity? And the dignity element calls for not only the protection of women's rights, but the kind of ways in which women's rights need to be ennobled by the technology spheres in terms of the ways in which women and women's progress is upheld and celebrated in the progress of technology, because these are not bifurcated or separate spheres, that women's progress is also the progress of technology.
Amazing. Professor Rangita De Silva De Alwis, it's always such a pleasure to speak with you, to learn from you. Thank you for all the incredible work that you're doing. On behalf of all Sri Lankans, I think we owe you this Thanksgiving. So thank you very much. And thank you for being a part of this show.
Thank you, Sonali. I'm very proud of the work that you're doing and the ways in which you're bringing these important conversations, these important discourse to the public sphere through a very intellectually rigorous form of discourse and debate. Thank you, Sonali.
Thank you very much.